Hey, what's up, Ron here. In today's video, I'm going to share with you what I think is the most effective watercolor technique to pretty much paint anything. I'm going to tease it a bit, but then we're going to dive deeper into it. You saw me spraying a bit of water directly on the paper just to start off with a bit of a wet surface in some spots. It's not really wet and wet what you're seeing right now. It's just getting a bit more flow. I will mention that this video is sponsored by my own new book, Painting a Masterpiece. I will talk about that more later on, but you can find it on Amazon, and I appreciate it a lot if you do check it out. Now, I'm starting with the background, and for that, I am mostly, and this is the crux actually of the technique. I'm not going to bury the lead too much. It is not necessarily about doing anything specific, but more about noticing and being sensitive to what you're painting. And the more you can perceive, the more you can see, the better, the more true to you the result is going to be. Now, I'm starting quite wet here because my plan is to have a good flow and then gradually start darkening more and more. The crux of painting this way is I have complete freedom, and I think any self-imposed rule will serve more as a hindrance more than anything else. So the heart of this is I am in complete freedom to do whatever I want. I don't have to cover the whole page with an initial wash. I don't have to use thin glazes. I don't have to use heavy, thick washes. Any self-imposed rule will simply be a hindrance. The goal is ultimate freedom, because only in ultimate freedom you can truly thrive. Now, a lot of people have a bit of a hard time reconciling what I just said with understanding techniques and having the basic control of watercolor. So yes, there is a bit of an element of basic control where you learn how to mix a wash, how to apply an even wash, you learn how to use the paint, mix it on the palette and all of that good stuff. But that is so basic. That is just the very beginning, and you may think you struggle with techniques. You're not. You're not. What you're struggling with is more likely than not perception. Seeing what you're seeing there, the more you can understand what you're looking at, the better the result is going to be. The more you understand light and shadow and how they function, and the more you are connected to your own creative juices as you're painting, the more of that you'll be able to pour into the paper. So I started with a thin wash that is jumping between violets and purples onto oranges and reds, and that will give us a nice little contrast of temperature. Now you see I'm spraying water. Is it a technique? No, I'm spraying because I wanted to stay wet for longer. And instead of painting like a robot, which so many people do, you want to paint one way, you just don't know it, but you end up always falling back into the same process. And you may have experienced this where you're almost getting a decent result, but you're working based on a method that is predetermined. I'm going to start with a thin wash that covers everything, and then I'm going to start establishing the mid values, and then I'm going to leave the shadows to the end. Any attempt to follow any dogmatic technique will only lead to suffering. It just won't feel like your process, and that's something I hear from a lot of people. They don't paint their own paintings. They merely follow tutorials and methods, and it always ends in lack of satisfaction. To me, the most satisfying thing is to give myself complete free roam, complete free range to do whatever I want. Now, I did take the bit of time it takes to master the beginning techniques, but that is, again, so basic. Okay, now, what I'm going to try and do here is right off the bat start merging what I already have here with the inside of this whatever vase, whatever that thing is. My mood almost was, let's see if I can just get a lot of flow in there. I'm not necessarily trying to connect each and every shape at all, but it felt right for me to, for the darker shapes, just have them connected to the background and seeing if I can play around with the feeling of focus, lack of focus. Sometimes I'll be in the mood to make something that is very punchy, full of sharp edges. There's nothing wrong with that. And especially now where I'm in the mood of, after working for so long on that huge scene from Florence, I'm in the mood to just make a lot of connections. So it's not a technique. It is not a you must make connections, because any of these musts will always take you out of the process. And the only way into making the perfect painting, as I like to call it, is to be fully in the process. So look at these beautiful transitions. They weren't made by following solid technique. Yes, I have made the idea of controlling the paint and all of that intuitive, but this is not very complex. You do it a couple of times, you get it. Where most people get stuck is they never graduate from that. And I would say there is no graduation, there is no graduating from that, because that never is really the way. That was more of a distraction that I don't want to say you shouldn't have gone through, but it was a detour that wasn't necessary for most people. Now look at this. It's such a beautiful thing where you get the paint to do the work for you. When you let these edges, you don't force a hard edge. You don't want to force anything, really. And I'm not forcing any of these hard edges. Now, I would say kind of sit into your chair, enjoy, maybe brew a cup of coffee even, because this is a long process. And it's a long process because I had a very clear idea in mind of what I wanted to achieve, and I set out to achieve it, and the painting demanded a lot of intricacies and a lot of refinement. And that can take time. Now, still, compared to the result I got, to me, that's not a lot of time. I think that painting something like this in, I don't know, about 40 minutes, 45 minutes is nothing, really. That's a fast painting still, especially if you compare it to other media. But what you're seeing here is the full, complete process. I didn't cut out anything, really, as much as I can remember. My apologies. My phone is telling me, oh, yeah, you should do this and you should do that. I haven't cut out anything from the process. I think I snoozed an earlier alarm clock. I shouldn't have snoozed it, but rather I should have just muted it. But in any case, this process demanded a bit more from me, and that is okay. You follow what the process dictates, but that's not, again, it's not done... It's not done because you have to or you need to do anything like that. That's just rubbish. That won't help anything. Now, a lot of people do wonder, how do you keep the edges wet for enough time so that, and I'm going to use this small brush, a bit of a technical note, to stretch out this paint and keep it mixed with pale water as much as I can. I'm trying to get some clean water. Sometimes it's challenging, and sometimes the water looks dirty, but it's actually clean. But people do wonder, how do you keep the paint wet for so long so that you can paint something with the edges touching and merging together? Very practical question. So first, you do see me using the water mister sprayer quite a bit. That's one part of it. Another part of it is, honestly, I don't care. So you see now the apple, and this is a perfect timing for that. You'll notice the yellow, this lemony yellow kind of blending into the warm background. You will get some backgrounds. You will get some uneven shapes. You will get uneven drawing. The thing is, you have a lot more wiggle room than you think. So you think, past a certain point, it's done, it's doomed. Not really. From my own experimentation, I find that you'll still get a graceful result even if you, quote unquote, let the paints connect, let two washes connect at a timing that was off. Now, I'm not sure what the reason is for this. I think it has to do with the overall painting takes precedence over small inaccuracies. And most often, this will be the case. If the entire painting sings as a whole, these minor differences not only become insignificant, they actually become graceful and beautiful. And you can already see this with the left side of this vase and how everything blended together. It's not perfect. The timing could have been maybe slightly better if I were more of a master of the perfect timing. You see artists like Misselbu do this. They get the perfect timing. A lot of Korean artists that do portraits that are insane. But that's more to speak to their technical prowess. There's a lot more than just the technical prowess. There is the vision, and they have it too, don't get me wrong. But there is a lot more than that. There is the vision. There is your uniqueness. There is the things that interest you. There is the subjects that capture your imagination. All of these things come into play. And it doesn't take much of a technical experience to get these things to look beautiful. Now, the shadow I'm using here is a little cooler. You may be surprised by that. The only reason I did it was when I looked at that shadow there, I observed it more up close. It actually looked warmer to me. And by the way, I'm adding this very thin, there's a thin, if you look at the reference photo, I linked it, there is a very thin shadow on the apple that looks very red. But in any case, that's how I noticed this shadow. It looked a little cooler to me. So sometimes if I see something that appears to be a bit cooler, a bit warmer, I like to exaggerate it. This is my preference. I'm a big fan of strong, bold colors and strong contrasts. That's just what I like. When a scene lacks that, I sometimes have a hard time taking interest in that. I think that speaks to the kind of views I'm used to seeing here and the kind of just something in my DNA. I don't know how to explain it, and it doesn't really matter why it happens. It's just the way I am. Something in those strong contrasts speak to me. And I love sometimes exaggerating them if I can. So that blue there creates a lovely contrast with the yellow and red on the apples. Now, I'll later on probably go ahead and darken it a bit, but that initial blue will be visible. Even if I now go over it with like a neutral tint or something like a charcoal black directly, or even if I go over it with an orange, it will still be visible, which is very interesting to note. You will see it. Now, as I'm moving across the painting, right? Because, as I mentioned, I don't really have a set of work order in mind. I'm just kind of painting the thing that feels right. The next logical step for me is that surface. The surface is a strong brown orange. Now, it should be darker than what I'm painting. And I knew that I may end up doing another glaze over it, but I decided not to because I think it looks better than the photo. Now, it's a matter of taste, really. Now, I'm missing a bit of yellow there. It should be more orange. I ended up on the red. So it's okay. You're fixing, you're adding. That is perfectly fine. You can fix it on the spot, by the way, too, on paper. And that's another video for another time I'll show you. But notice how, again, first the apple blends into it seamlessly. It was wet enough. I started with wet enough paint. Now, this looks strong, but it's actually pretty weak compared to the photo. But what it does achieve is a stronger contrast with the shadows. That blue shadow included, but also the shadows I'm going to cast to the left side of these, I don't know what it is, like a pumpkin and some kind of another pumpkin or a gourd or whatever. It's going to work really well, and you'll see, which is why I decided to leave it like that. That's a decision I make later on. But so now for starters, while I have this wash going, I'm skipping the green vegetable, whatever it is, and I'm just working on that orange while I have it. Just practical purposes, once you have a color mixed, it's very easy to continue using it. Sometimes I'll ditch that color and change to a different color, or I'll use a different brush. That's another great little trick for you. If there was a thing as tricks here, that can help because you don't have to remix with the same brush. You already have it on that brush, so you just use a different brush. Now, what you see me doing, by the way, I don't remember. No, it's the same brush I'm using, is I'm already combining these shadows with the ground. I'm painting them directly. Now, the not ground, surface. The surface is orange. These shadows are a little on the purple side, on the violet side. That, once again, contrast of colors. Now, you will see later on with this green thing on the right, you will see another type of contrast that I would argue is responsible for making this painting as good as it is. You will see that, and I'm going to mention it to you. You'll know when it happens. To me, it's one of the sweetest points of this process. There's something very interesting going on there, but notice how these bluish purples, they work really well with the oranges. It's almost like a cheat code. You just use that and you're good. And I'm going to go back to some of my oranges for that back of the table. And in a moment, I'm going to put in the shadow there. There's a very gentle shadow there. Sorry for all the alarms outside. I don't know what's going on. Everyone's bicycle has alarms today. Or motorcycles, I don't know. But there is a dark shadow there, and then I am moving back into my orange to put a dark, muted orange back there. Now, if you constantly compare your painting to the reference photo, that's okay. But I find at some point I'm kind of moving away from it, and I'm seeing the painting for what it is. This is another point where perception is active. Your perception will be responsible to what comes out on paper, and the way at least I feel about it is not only the way you perceive the reference photo, but also how you perceive your own painting. And noticing things that are going on in it is a huge part of what's responsible, at least for me. and in my processes to the result I get. Now we're going to do a quick ad break. This video is sponsored by my own book that is just now out on Amazon, Painting a Masterpiece, How I Painted 100 Cars to Achieve Watercolor Perfection. I have talked about it a lot. This is the culmination of my 100 Cars challenge. If you feel like you need some inspiration, if you feel like you need a nudge, this is definitely something you want to check out, even if you're not necessarily into cars. The book isn't really a how-to. It's not an educational book, but if you read between the lines, I think it will provide you with a lot of inspiration in your paintings. And even if you do different media, it's still going to be very interesting for you to see. I think there is a gradual process of improvement that I've gone through that is just going on hyperspeed towards the latter third of the challenge, and I think it's just a beautiful art book to have. I'm constantly looking at it. I have a lot of fun just flipping through it, and I would recommend you check it out if you're into painting, watercolor, cars, any of the above, and sometimes you feel like you're missing that inspiration. You want to open up a nice picture book, read a bit of my words describing the process. I think you'll find it very fun. Or if you know someone who would find it fun, you want to get them a cool gift, I think it's a neat idea. And yeah, check it out. Links to all of the options on Amazon. It should be available anywhere. I'm going to link the US side, Canada, Australia, Japan, all of Europe. Everything should be there. Thank you so much for checking it out. I really do appreciate it. Now back to the process. So moving on here, we have two pretty significant details and pieces to this puzzle. One of them is that pumpkin to the left, and then we have this, whatever it is, you'll correct me, maybe it's another pumpkin and it's green, or a kind of a fat zucchini, I don't know, to the right. I don't know why I decided to connect now this dark orange shadow. It felt right to connect it first, because that's probably where I want to have a smoother edge, and then the strong, the lighter orange of that pumpkin will be separated with a hard edge. That is probably why I did it. So the next logical step would be to sharpen up some shadows, patch things up, and then move on to the large green element that to me makes the painting. Now you see, as I'm working my way around it, I do feel like sometimes a shadow needs strengthening. It's kind of got too lost, so to speak. I am darkening kind of the peripheries of the painting as well. I could have done the same thing on the right side of the surface. I kind of forgot. Doesn't matter as much. I have no idea what I'm doing there. Sorry, it's outside the camera. It's probably just establishing that smoother transition. A lot of the things I do wet and wet really does come down to intuition. So sometimes you'll have to really develop a feel for it. I know it's such a cop-out answer, but it is a matter of time and feel. Now I mix this nice little yellow orange that I feel like is really fitting for a first wash almost on that. I'm going to call it a pumpkin. On this pumpkin, I'm going to zoom out a bit. Now look at the edge. Okay, the timing is off, so I'm gonna get some effects there where it mixes. It is perfectly fine. You can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Now I'm mixing in a bit of undersea green just to start bringing in the green, but this green isn't strong enough. It's not vibrant enough. It's also not dark enough. I'm going to start introducing, on my other palette I have the black, that's where I get the black paint, but I'm going to start introducing a bit of this color. I don't know exactly what it is. Honestly, it doesn't matter. It's some kind of a phthalo green. Okay, what you want is a more artificial green in this particular example. Now remember how I talked to you about contrasts. So this single pumpkin has it all. It has a contrast of values because you'll notice there's a very light pattern of highlights on the right side. I actually sketched it out. You will see me painting around it carefully. That's one contrast. There's contrast on the dark side of the scale. The left side of this is very, very dark. But then you'll notice there's a bit of a reflected orange on it from the pumpkin to the left. Here's my black color, by the way. So you'll notice that, and that's another thing I want to make sure I include and express. You'll see me do that in a second. Now notice how I'm almost treating it like one area that I can freely work with and edit and take my time. That's how I like to tackle these large areas. Some people see them as a battleground. To me, it is just so much fun seeing the different colors and patterns I can achieve. Now look at this beautiful orange reflected light there. One of my probably favorite spots of this painting, and it's quite dark. It's a misleadingly dark. It actually looks light. It is not because it's still in the shadow. Once you put in sort of the right value, it will look nice. It will look sweet. You'll notice how it already looks much, much better. See, the brain knows when something is off. It just sometimes doesn't know what it is. Now, if you understand how light and shadow and reflected light works, if you understand it, you don't have to know how to do something. You just understand it. It will make a huge difference in your results. Now, here in a second will come a very interesting moment where I'm going to play around with one more contrast, the saturation. So far, everything about this is quite muted. The orange, the greens, the orange on the left is a little stronger, but still muted. But I'm going to include a bit of that same phthalo green that I used up top, and you're going to see the moment I put that brush mark in, it changes everything, and to the end of the process, it makes a huge difference. It makes this a very interesting focal point too. Now, you'll notice I'm painting very carefully around these shapes. I'm going to introduce with a small brush. By the way, look at how it merges into the orange of the surface. It's okay. It wasn't the perfect timing. It still will look wonderful. You'll get a nice little blendy effect there, a bit of cauliflowers. Look at these brush marks with this artificial phthalo green. This will make the entire difference. This is what I was talking about. It stands out. Now, when you look at a reference photo, it's actually not there. I don't know why something in me said, this is where I want to include some, I'm going to spray some water. I'm trying to explain as fast as I can what I'm doing. But I sprayed some water to blend that harsh highlight. You'll see me coming back with a kind of blending it in a bit, but still maintaining paper white. Very important here, because that kind of a contrast is present there. But going back to the point about the green, something intuitively told me, let's break all of the neutral and muted colors. Let's put just a spray of green in there. Because everything so far, maybe some of the yellow on the apples is a little vibrant, more vibrant than the rest. But here something felt like I have to put in something strong there. And it's going to carry it out all throughout the process. You will see. So right now we're kind of halfway through. We don't have a lot to do necessarily. The painting, and now upon zooming out, it looks wonderful. What we do have to do is finish up that pumpkin on the left and the background and some of the shadows to kind of patch them up, improve them. The background that I initially painted was too light. Ideally, I could have painted it dark enough had I caught it on time. I haven't. That is okay. Nothing wrong with that. I'll show you how I fix it. But unlike the surface that I actually want to be that way, I need that contrast there. The reason I need the contrast there is because of the apples. I want the apples to pop against a dark background. But first, we're going to tackle that pumpkin to the left. I'm trying to mix not enough paint, but just the right color that I'm seeing. I'm going to end up with too strong of an orange that I will fix by adding a bit of lemon yellow. You know, people always ask about the specific colors I use. They're of little consequence. How little consequence? Very little consequence. If you understand the idea of saturation and hue, you'll do well. Hue is basically just the color. Is it a lemon yellow? Is it a more orangey yellow? Is it an orange? Is it a red? Is it a green? Is it a blue? That's the idea of hue. That's the actual pigment is different. The idea of saturation, how colorful it is, like we've just seen in that pumpkin to the right, the green one, stronger saturation of that phthalo green. It's almost also a change of hue, by the way. It's almost not just a saturation. So all of these things together, the more you understand, the better you'll get the result. And I noticed, this is too orange, it's too flat. I'm going to add a bit of yellow in a second. One more thing, I don't want to fall in the trap of having these highlights dry and be too harsh. Because right now, they're quite strong. And it's sometimes, for me, it's a struggle to make a smooth transition in a small area. Sometimes I'll let it dry, as you'll see with the apples in a couple of seconds, and then try and smoothen out the edge. Sometimes I'll try and do it on the fly. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We have a very strong shadow there on the left side, so I'm going in with the dark paint. Sometimes, even for me, that I've been at it for 8 years, which I think is a long time to be painting. Even for me, often the weakness is color harmony. Not because I wasn't accurate compared to the reference photo, maybe even because I tried being accurate to the reference photo instead of following my own senses. And I think one of the characteristics of my paintings that I absolutely adore is that the color harmony is perfect. And this is an example of that. I think that's why I really like this result, because the color harmony is really, really good here too. Sometimes everything will be perfect, but the color harmony. But here something ended up working out. The reason I'm telling you this is because it's almost, I would say it's not really a perfect science. It's almost as if you buying into your own color harmony will help others buy into it. So if you almost know what you're doing, it doesn't matter what you do. See that weird counterintuitive thing there? If you think you know what you're doing, if you truly know, you don't think you know what you're doing, it will almost inevitably lead to a result that other people can buy into. And that's not magical or woo-woo stuff. That's actually very practical. So I find for paintings where I just know I'm placing in the thing that will work best, I know this is going to work, I end up with something that is very convincing, very convincing. Now, it's not 100%. Sometimes you'll think you messed it up and everyone else can see it looks wonderful because you're too close to the picture. That can also happen. Now, I'm talking about something beyond that. I'm talking about a process where during the process you know that you got things right. You feel it with every brush mark you put in. That's a mistake, by the way. I'm going to put a bit of darkness. I remember that. That was a whoopsie doopsie. Need to come back with clean water and some orange and help that go back to what it should be. But all of these are just, it's not techniques, it's demands. It's what the painting demands. I'm very focused on what the painting demands all of this time, in a trance state. So yeah, it's almost as if you can buy into it, you'll get others to buy into it. Sometimes it's just hard for people to buy into their own paintings, and that's okay. I think it's a bit more gritty and messy than people think. The process is, it's almost like you have to kind of allow yourself to get lost to find a way in the micro and the macro. These types of processes where I just jump in the water, go for it, always end up the best. Always. It always is the result. Now, some paintings demand almost that you be more meticulous. If we're talking about a 240 by 70 size painting, 240 centimeters, like the one I'm working on, yes. Here's, by the way, I'm fixing some of that orange with a bit more yellow. It felt like it should be a little more yellowy. Some paintings demand a bit more, I would say, care and preparation just because of their sheer size. But even for those paintings, you can work in smaller areas. It's never really an obstacle. Most paintings honestly just demand your care and attention. If you care about it, if you put the necessary attention to it, you will get something lovely no matter what process you choose. I just find that to me it's easier to put that care if I just throw myself in the water, like this process, like the process I did with the grapes and the pear. Like a lot of my painting processes are like that, which is why the frustrating answer of it's not really a technique. It's more about observing and seeing. The more you observe, the better the result is going to be. And this is something that no one really says, no one really talks about it. Everyone talks about techniques. Everyone talks about technical proficiency. It's too simplistic to be just that. From my own experience, it is something other than that that's at play here. Something that's sometimes hard to define. I do my best to define it, the thing you notice, being really into the process, being there. Sometimes throwing yourself in the water can give you that necessary kick. Sometimes almost the less you try to produce, the less you try to edit, and the more you just express, you'll end up with something better. Almost like the less you care about the result, you have that freedom to just put things in there. And it's very nice to talk about it, and it's very nice to know that, but experiencing viscerally is very different. To experience it, to actually experience it, I cannot talk you into getting there, and I cannot even say that that's the way to do it. But from what I experienced, that's the way that gets me the best results. I hope that makes sense to you. Now, as we're inching to, I would say, the last quarter, one more practical note I will say, you'll notice we have that little stem thing left. That is the way I worked around it. So what you'll often experience with time is there are areas where you can allow yourself to ignore. That is usually where there is a sharp contrast. So any point where there is a sharp transition, you can ignore and kind of work a specific area, make it look just like you want it to, and only then come back and visit that. Now, the reason to do that is practical only, because you're trying to make the most out of this green pumpkin or whatever it is. We don't have time to work on the stem. So I worked my way around it because there's a very sharp transition there from the green to a lighter yellow. It's just a very practical thing. I did paint the shadow to the left, that little dark shadow, but I completely skipped the middle. So that is something I find very useful just from a practical standpoint, because a lot of people feel the pressure. I need to now, connect everything together as much as I can. If anything that I don't connect and merge won't look good. I want to talk a bit about more on the shadow to the left of that orange pumpkin. We'll talk about that in a second. But now what I'm doing is bringing out more of the apples. That first wash of mine doesn't include the mid values as much as I believed I have included it in the start. The light and shadow is a little confusing, so I'm trying to find my way. I would say that's the weakest part of the painting, but I think it doesn't really matter because the entire painting works really well together. It's one of these paintings that do sync, so that probably means everything is on point. But just, as a side note, a lot of this I could have achieved on the first go had I been enough aware of it. And I do find that if you get it on the first go, not because of the mentality of it, but just because that's how it ends up looking a little better. And you can see that with that green pumpkin. That is, to me, the focal point. But yeah, it still works. Do another glaze, be a little gentle, figure out where the light and shadow is. The color for the apple, it can be a little misleading too. I do love that combination. It's basically a green and a red, but if you almost mix too much green, it will not look right. My green here is a lemon yellow. It's a very lemony, soft, slightly opaque yellow. I find it's a really useful color and pigment, generally speaking, to bring out foliage that is within shadows. You can do quite a bit with it. You can create some beautiful greenery there, wet and wet. Almost using, just generally speaking, using opaque paint, wet and wet, which is something I enjoy a lot. So now we're moving on to address this little stem there. I am dropping in, yellowy, warm paint, kind of red even. I would say it should be more on the yellow side. Hopefully I'll amend that in a second, add a bit of yellow to this mix. And kind of putting it in random spots and then using a bit of water to move it a bit to break off the monotony of the edges. And then I will add that there's a dark bit there that I think looks really good. There we go with a bit of yellow there. I know it lacked a bit of warmth, I remember. I painted this earlier today, so I remember. I'm narrating it after the fact. Ideally, I wanted to narrate while doing the process, but it didn't pan out this way. And then you'll be surprised at how just a little bit of darkness, like a spot there, or a spot or two, will tell the entire story. And that stem feels like it's connected. It looks good. It looks like a part of the scene. And it just works, it doesn't take away from the rest. The colors, because I'm using the same simple colors, the result is overall harmonious. I'm using a very warm red here, Powerful Scarlet by Daniel Smith. I'm using a very warm yellow, lemon yellow. I used just a bit of quinacridone in a very specific spot that I forgot what it is right now. It could be this pumpkin, actually. Other than that, very simple. My greens are very simple. Look at how this reflected light, by the way, and I sprayed more water again. This reflected orange on the green looks so good. That's one of these little touches that if you understand it, everything basically reflects onto everything else in the scene, especially depending on the angle of light. You can make so many things look really awesome. So now it's time to darken the background. That is the elephant in the room. That is where we'll have to put in the most work to not ruin what is working about the flow there. I do want a strong contrast with the apples and that vase, but I want to make sure I don't destroy in the process. Destroy the gentle and very natural mixes and transitions there. So I'm being quite careful, but I do want to push it. Now, the main point of danger is as we move towards this, just that area where the vase is, where it ends, you want to smoothly transition into the darks without breaking the beautiful edge on the vase. Now, it will have to change a bit, that edge, and that's okay. The way to do this should be very gentle here. I don't want to mess it up. Now, you do see this right side is very dark, so I'm kind of gradually, I'm mixing an interesting mix. This is a burnt sienna by Daniel Smith. It's not really the most orangey burnt sienna, but it works well here, especially well, actually better than an orange. I mix it with my Carbazole Violet, and it just creates this natural, I would say, gray purple. Could be brown, but I wanted some distinction with the surface, so I'm keeping it fairly on the more purple side rather than the brown. The purple is a dirty purple. You can have a brown, which is a dirty orange. I chose to go here with a bit more on the purple side. And now I'm kind of contemplating how do I connect it to that heavy shadow on the left, and this is a good opportunity to darken that shadow. Because I want to have something that looks natural. And if you want an example of what I mean by natural, look at the bottom left corner. Look at the shadow cast by the pumpkin, how it starts sharp and then it fades and it becomes a part of the surface. That's the thing I'm after. If I can achieve that, to me, that is chef's kiss perfection. And when I'm working on an area, I'm there. Like, I'm really trying to make the most of it. So now the background is still wet, but I have to pick up the pace, make sure I don't mess it up. And, you know, I want to darken that area around the apples because that's the entire reason why I darkened the background. But fast after that, I want to completely paint from the center to the left and basically block out that entire dark shadow, which can be very challenging sometimes. So hopefully seeing this will spark something in you. Maybe you'll gain a better understanding of how to do that. Now, because I'll be using very dark paint, it's okay for the edge of that large violet shape to start to dry. Because I'm using, again, very dark paint, you'll see that it doesn't really break off the shape, but I'm very well aware of what I have on paper. I have to be. Now, looking back, I should have used that same large Michael Soloviev brush with the 5 kind of tips there, the other bamboo brush, but that's fine. You'll see a few tricks for making it work. So even though I'm using a smaller brush here, that is a wonderful brush, I'm starting to really enjoy it. Just spraying a bit of water like you just saw me do and tilting the paper will, even though I'm using very clear like vertical and horizontal lines, it will start to blend in. It will start to merge and look. It's almost like a cross-hatching with pencil. You put in the pattern and from afar it looks good. With watercolor, you put in the pattern, but then you spray some water, tilt it, and it will move and look like a natural transition and not like a grid you drew of basically going from dark to light. So you see it starts to blend in. It looks good. And the most important thing, we've achieved the contrast we wanted with the apples. So now it's time to connect it to that left section that, quite frankly, up until now wasn't dark enough as well. Now I'm being very careful here. I'm using the paper's tooth almost to hint at a very smooth transition, you see, and I'm trying to preserve that as much as I can. Now, a rookie mistake I would do in the past was I would connect that shadow to the shadow on the vase. I know now not to do that because I like the way it looks. I like that strong contrast. I don't need that but rather strong shadow on the left side of the vase. I really like it the way it is. I would have lost that in the past. I would just paint over it and then realize I shouldn't have. That's a spider sense you develop with the years, which is crazy to say. Sometimes I say these things and I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, I'm old. I know I'm not old, but still. So now here I have to be very gentle. Again, I don't want to ruin that smooth transition. I want to maintain the opening of the vase, make it look natural, still be accurate, right? Not destroy the solidness of the drawing that I did take care to draw accurately. So I'm I'm doing the lazy approach of just very gently putting in very sharp brush marks on the tooth of the paper, just to slowly edge my way into the edge, so to speak. And now I switched over to a different brush to kind of get a bit of more control over the edge. There will be some manipulation here of the edge to make sure it still flows, but what I'm doing right now is a very gentle touch, because I don't want to destroy the thing that worked so well there. The more you layer in watercolor, the more danger of destroying stuff there is. That's just the way it is. Watercolor is a fragile, in a good way, medium. This is a big part of its beauty. Now, this doesn't mean you can't get a beautiful result. You know, overwork gets thrown out there a lot. One of my most successful videos is on overwork. But to be honest with you, overwork isn't a big deal if you know what your vision is and you just follow it. It's much simpler than that, actually. Now, everything is dried almost fully. It doesn't matter though, because all I'm doing is blending in edges, just kind of sharpening, not sharpening, rather softening the edges on this apple. By the way, I love filming in 4K. I don't usually do that, but here I have, and so I can zoom in, show you the details, and it looks really cool. And it's good because the colors in this painting are spot on, so it shows it even more. These apples do have some softer, transitions there that I wanted to show more of. Now, if you really notice and you kind of squint your eyes, you jump from my painting to the reference photo, you'll notice some differences, right? The ground, again, is the floor, the surface is darker. Some of the details on the apples are darker. Some of the contrast is different. To me, I love that. Look at the shadows under the two pumpkins. I want that strong contrast. If I were to darken that surface, I would lose that. And I didn't want to lose that. So I made a decision to stop at that point, not do another glaze. That's what I talked about earlier. Now here I pre-wet and then put in the paint so that I get a smooth edge to that shadow that I think looks fantastic. It's a little cool, a little on the cool side. But that gives a bit more of a volume to this cylindrical thing, whatever it is, the vase. And now I'm signing this, and I'm going to share with you the scanned result. I think this is spot on. This is a painting that is mine fully. I made some changes from the reference photo, but my communication with it and the painting process, to me, that's peak. That's exactly how I want my paintings to look like, basically. So I do want to thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope you gained something from this video, especially if it's just inspiration to go ahead and maybe try something out differently, maybe be a little more bold and daring. I do want to mention once again, this video is sponsored by my Painting a Masterpiece book, now on Amazon. This is pretty much what you can expect. This chronicles the entire 100 Cars Challenge, and I think it's a great way to own basically a bunch of my paintings, to have them accessible if you're looking for watercolor inspiration, or if you know someone who's looking for watercolor inspiration. This isn't a pure how-to, but I think if you read between the lines, there's a lot to be gained from this process of painting 100 cars in order to achieve what is, in my opinion, the perfect painting or a watercolor masterpiece. If you do have these ambitions hidden in you of creating something truly great, I would appreciate it if you give it a go. And I do want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who supports me over on Patreon. You allow me to post tons of free content for everyone to see, and it's just a lot of fun. I do hope to do a couple of more exclusive processes there real soon, so keep an eye out with that. I'll talk to you again real soon. Take care.